Today's exploration into narrative psychology is entitled Narrative Structure, Gaming Theory, and Crowd Control. Well, they might not seem like they all go together, but in fact they do, and we'll show in a little while how exactly you can understand how people self-organize when they're playing a game into narrative structure. And if you have prevented that by imposing an outside structure that is not narratively based, you can actually make a game that people will not relate to. Further, you can apply these same technologies of organization to crowd control to make sure that you create narratives so that people move through lines like in theme parks or in political parties, that they get on certain bandwagons because you've prepared a narrative for them. And the way you do this, as we'll see in a moment, using the same example again, is like dipping a string into sugar water and having the crystals form on it. Well, very similarly, you can put narrative events, something that is a narrative attractor, out there in narrative space, which is unorganized, and have the narrative attractor draw people to it because they recognize at a subconscious level the fact that there's something narrative going on and they want to be a part of it, join it, be able to understand their environment a little better. As they become attracted to these points that you've put out there, they will form a narrative that is along your lines rather than self-organizing into one that will still be a narrative but may bear no resemblance to what you'd like them to do in that space. So let's begin with the concept of narrative psychology and why people try to form narratives in the first place in the real world or in a game. Okay, so let's look at what narrative is. That will give us our key. What narrative is inside our own minds, we have an operating system, we have perspectives, we have things that we consider and means that we use to consider them from. For example, we have a sense of reason, we have a sense of passion, we have skepticism and confidence, we have a conscience, and we're also drawn by temptation. These are just a few of the things that are going on inside our own heads. When we try to solve a problem, we bring them all to bear. And when we bring them to bear on a problem, we're able to say, what kind of understanding do I have of this problem and potentially its solution in terms of logic, in terms of reason? What do I have in terms of my feelings? What will satisfy my feelings most? Or what will make me least dissatisfied with my feelings, least fulfilled, even if it's a satisfactory conclusion logically? In addition, we're also looking at our temptation. Should we just do what's good for now, do the thing that's expedient perhaps, and worry about the consequences later? Or should we take more of a conscience perspective, which is what are the ramifications of this beyond the immediate desire or need that I have? Will in the long run this be a bad thing or a good thing for myself or for others? And if we look at our skepticism, it's our self-doubt. Do we think we can make this work or not? Confidence. Do we believe we actually have the capacity to solve this problem and move on? So with these elements working around in our heads, it's no wonder that when we come together in groups that we form a group mind. Instead of being general practitioners, instead of being the jack of all trades when we come into groups, we start that way. But then as the group continues to meet or continues to gather in regard to a common issue, whether it's a tribe or whether it's a terror cell or a political faction, or people meeting around a boardroom in a corporation, they're going to get together, and as they sit in that room, they're going to self-organize into various specialties. And why? Because every single individual has his own life experience, meaning that one of us may spend more time trying to solve problems using a logical approach than using a passionate approach, or focusing on our skepticism rather than focusing on our confidence. But all of those are necessary to have a well-rounded look at every problem within ourselves, and when we come together in groups, we find that after a period of self-organization, there will emerge a voice of reason, there will emerge a skeptic, there will emerge somebody who speaks for conscience and somebody who says, what are the immediate gains? All of these things will automatically happen because when we specialize and become specialists in these various areas, we have greater resolution, greater depth, greater attention paid to that side of the problem than if we all gathered around and tried to be general practitioners. Now, that makes sense, but what actually drives it? Well, what drives it is that every single individual has his own life experience and may gravitate more towards reason. Therefore, they would be the person who would naturally rise to the point of being the voice of reason when a group self-organizes. And someone who's found in their life experience has led them to be more skeptical than most because of the way the cards fell, well, they're going to be the person who does the best job of being the skeptic in the group. Now, the only thing that's a problem with that is in real life, we don't necessarily, when we're doing this, have the job that we're best for because of political considerations. I scratch my back. No, I scratch your back, you scratch my back, scratch mine, I wouldn't need you. Okay, when we have deals like that and we get into politics and we get into power plays and we start forming alliances, each alliance is going to have its own narrative in which we'll be specialists, but we might work against what's better for the larger group because we can get our crony into a place even though he's not best suited for the job. And hence you get the Peter Principle and all of these other notions of nepotism and what's going on that doesn't put the person who's best to see into that resolution. But for the moment, let's not complicate it with that and say we self-organize. Of course, that's why story structure came to be in the first place, is that authors were trying to understand individual minds and also understand how people went about dealing with each other, what was going on. And the conventions of story structure, like there's always a goal and always a main character, these things ultimately came to be because they reflected the truisms underneath the subject matter, underneath the points of interest, underneath the specific people. They're always these same things because when we specialize, we represent elements in our own minds. We call it the story mind. It's a group mind. And that's why you see a corporate identity, because in every group mind is a main character, which is the one through whom we see things, the one who has the personality, the one who has the essence that this is the identity of that corporate group. That happens the same way as we each have, I think, therefore I am, within ourselves. And when we get into groups, the group takes on an identity. And usually the president or somebody who's in charge, the CEO, will become the representative of that, whether he's the king or whether he's the chief operating officer or whatever. Okay, someone will lead the political party and they will say that they are channeling basically the identity of the group mind. Now, once we have this in place, we can see that if we create a virtual world in a game, if there is no kind of structure at all, and we just put a bunch of things in there, people will automatically try to form a structure because that's what we do. And if it's a multiplayer, a MUD, okay, basically you have people then coming together and forming these little narrative groups in which there'll be somebody who's the voice of reason, somebody who's the skeptic, and you can hear in their conversations in the online chatter back and forth in a MUD that these people are actually adopting these roles. It happens automatically, but that's kind of chaotic. What you've done is created an environment and said, now all these people can do whatever they want and they self-organize. That's fine, but if you want to move beyond that, suppose you're going from virtual reality to augmented reality in the real world, or suppose you're trying to do crowd control in a theme park, or suppose you're trying to get people to join a political party along particular lines and maneuver them into becoming part of a larger narrative. Well, you do this by putting in a narrative attractor. In other words, just something that's out there completely with nothing going on, just a bunch of information. That's a narrative space. It's raw material. Nothing's been built with it yet. And so you can create these narrative attractors by creating memes. And the way you do that is that you put out something that matches a structural point with an attractive piece of subject matter. And when the two are brought together, then at that point, people will be attracted to it and make it a meme. And as soon as they make a meme, which is basically like a gene of psychology's genome, okay, when they make a meme, then at that point, those memes can be put together in a pre-planned pattern that you've laid out there to attract people to these different narrative elements that cannot help but self-organize into a group mind that has a mindset along the lines you want the group to be thinking. And when you do that, these memes begin to combine sort of like proteins folding, or the folds in your brain, or the ridges of the mountains of the moon that illustrate a certain dynamic has been at work. And that dynamic then, because of those folds, will channel the energy through the system. As Bucky Fuller once said, the flow of energy through a system tends to organize that system. The flow of psychology through a narrative space tends to organize that space along narrative lines, which then reflect the psychology of a group mind. So once you get out of gaming, where you're actually saying, we want people to organize in this manner, and they still have a sense that it is their organization, they're simply attracted to these elements and don't know why, It forms the kind of play that you're looking for, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality, a single player game, it's still going to happen. And then when you move beyond that into pure reality and you're trying to do crowd control or political parties or maneuver a group to do one thing or another or reorganize it along new lines, you can interject yourself with narrative attractors and make it all happen. So that's enough to introduce you to the concepts right now, and that's all I wanted to do today. For those of you who are just trying to write a story, sorry for the theory. I'm theory-centric, can't help it. And hopefully you will find some value in this. And if you want to learn more about the story mind, which is what we call it, and how you can apply it both to the creation of fiction and also to the real world, visit me at storymind.com, where you will find hundreds of hours of videos like this and thousands of articles that I've written over 25 years describing all of that information. So again, storymind.com. I'm Melanie Phillips. Look forward to meeting with you again next time with another topic about narrative psychology.